The AWARE Project's aim is to balance the public conversation about psychedelics, spread accurate information, and give a new face to psychedelia. We feel that this change will occur through connection and relationship, one individual at a time. We are calling on everyone whose lives have been improved through the mindful use of psychedelics to educate themselves and become ambassadors for the psychedelic experience. Show those around you that people who use psychedelics mindfully cross all social, racial, economic, and political boundaries.
With that, I'd like to introduce Vicki Kraft, who I just got to meet the last couple months, and I'm so thrilled to have you here and just hear about what you're up to. So thank you. Give her a hand.
Can you guys hear me? Okay, so hello everybody, welcome and thank you for coming. So glad to see everybody here interested in this topic, because this is my favorite topic.
Can you guys hear in the back?
Can you hear?
Okay. Either I can turn, do you want to be closer or I can turn this up? Closer.
Talk closer?
Yeah.
I like that. Is that good?
Yeah.
Sounds so loud.
Great.
Okay. So I just want to start out by saying that public speaking and getting up here and doing this is probably my worst nightmare. And I'm sure there are other people out here that can totally relate to that. Totally. And I know that because when I was in graduate school studying to be a therapist, of course I wrote a paper on fear of public speaking, and I learned that it's the #1 fear over death. So more people are afraid to do this than they are of dying. Yeah, they are. And you know, in ayahuasca experiences, sometimes you can have like an ego death, and I've had many of those, and I really don't know which one is worse. So, you know, and I have lots of fears and really ridiculous phobias that I have, and I realized over the years of drinking ayahuasca that it really has, you know, I never really lived into my full potential because I was so consumed by my fears. And now I've learned that it's more important for me to be self-actualized than it is for me to indulge in these fears. So I just do things like this that are really uncomfortable and like way outside my comfort zone because I'm here to grow and learn. And to evolve, and that's what I'm all about now. So I'd just like to ask, so I can get a show of hands, so I know what we're dealing with here. How many people in this room have never done ayahuasca? They don't know what ayahuasca is. And a few? Okay, how many people have never tried ayahuasca? Okay, so most of you know. How many of you have ever heard of Santo Diame? Or never heard of Santo Diame? How about never heard of Santo Diame? So you've heard of it. Oh, okay, good. This is great. Okay, so I'm going to talk about, first I want to state kind of like another clarity thing. So I didn't come here to talk about, you know, getting everybody to come to my Santo Diame church. I came here to talk about the healing powers of ayahuasca and the integration work that I'm interested in. You know, I feel that this is what is really important, so I'm not here to proselytize for my church. I just wanted to get clear on that, okay? So what is ayahuasca? So ayahuasca is this name of this psychoactive tea that's been used by indigenous people for many years. We know at least that the Inca, as far back as the Inca Indians, have used the medicine in their spiritual practices for prophecy and divination, medical purposes. And then we also know that the different indigenous tribes from all over South America who had no form of communication with one another, they all knew to put together these two particular plants that make up the ayahuasca. They all knew that, and they knew that from listening to the plants themselves. The word ayahuasca is from the Quechua language, which is the indigenous language of the people of the Andes in South America, and it means the vine of the soul, and it's referred to as an entheogen. As you all know what an entheogen is. An entheogen is a Greek word for entheos, meaning the God, the divine within. So this is a substance that's used for, for spiritual, religious, and shamanic context. And so they use this word to differentiate between other psychedelics and used for other similar substances. So in the Santo Diame tradition, we call ayahuasca daime. So you'll hear me say daime. I still mean ayahuasca. It's the same thing. So just so to make some clarity for some of you who might not know, what it is the combination of two plants. So it's a vine, and inside the vine is has harmines and harmalines, which are similar to MAO inhibitors. So it has a purgative effect and psychoactive effect. And then the other part of the plant that is made from a leaf, and the leaf has the DMT. That's the psychedelic compound. So we already have DMT in our system, so our system kind of flushes it out. So in order to keep the DMT in the system, the MAO inhibitor is there so that it will assimilate into our system together. So the combination of the inhibitor and the DMT creates this sophisticated chemical reaction resulting in the visionary experience. So the general effects of ayahuasca, just in general, are, there's a catharsis, a physical catharsis and cleansing, detoxing, and then there's also a spiritual and psychological cleansing, and I'll talk about that. And it also shows you, profound how there's this intelligence at work, and the I would say that the boundaries between the worlds become more permeable, and so we have access to information and making more insights and connections. So I'd like to explain a little bit to you about what it does to the brain. There's this man named Jordi Riba, who's been studying the effects of ayahuasca for the last 15 years. And he's been studying the brain, and so what we learned from him is that there are 3 areas of the brain that are highly activated. And the first is the neocortex. That's the part where we perceive and our reasoning, and where we make our decisions. Then the other part of the brain is the amygdala, the part of the limbic system where we store where memories are stored. Early emotional memories are stored, especially trauma, loss, and anything really significant is inside that area of the brain. And then the insula is the part of the brain where it creates a bridge between the two. So all of these areas are highly activated during the ayahuasca. So now we have an opportunity, he says, to gaining access to repressed trauma and emotional memories, and they now have an opportunity to be processed in a new way of perceiving because the cortex is now expanded. So he says that when there's a stimulus in the brain, it tries to understand it based on previous experience. So we have certain patterns or imprints on the brain that are activated every time we face a similar situation. So he uses an example, say you're a little kid and you get bit by a dog, and now you have this story that all dogs are bad, and so you have this, it's pathway in your brain that's going, oh my God, dogs are bad, and you hear a dog bark, and it's like a pathway, and it's like scar tissue, it's thick, and it only goes that way, right? It only has those thoughts, or only have an opportunity to go in one direction. So with ayahuasca, we have the conscious part of the new brain now is able to temporarily override these previously entrenched patterns, and now for allowing for new connections to be made. So and memories to be reevaluated. So now the dog barks, and you go, oh, maybe not all dogs bite. You know, you have a new opportunity to go down a different path. And that's really important. So users get this perspective on that past experiences and these deeply rooted, you know, how get a perspective on these are deeply rooted patterns of behavior. So that's what happens with ayahuasca. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the Santo Diame. So my experience with ayahuasca has all been with the Santo Diame. I've been drinking for 16 years consistently. So it's a syncretic religion, and it means it's combining different types of modalities. One is of course the tradition of using ayahuasca as a sacrament. Then the other is it contains this esoteric folk Catholicism. Doesn't really look like that, but it does contain those teachings of early Christianity. It has the African Brazilian tradition of Umbanda, mediumship, and it also incorporates the teachings of Allan Kardec in Spiritism. So the Santo Daime is one of 3 religions that use that have come up in the century that are centered around the use of ayahuasca as a sacrament. The Santo Daime was started in 1930s in Brazil, and its founder was this very tall black man who was a rubber trapper, and he was working with the ayahuasca, and one day he saw this image in the moon, and this of a woman, and she presented herself to him, and as her name was Clara, and she said that she identified herself as Clara, and he called her the Virgin of Conception, the Queen of the Forest. And she began to tell him that she was going to give him this doctrine, this religion, that was going to be centered around each person having a direct experience with the divine, within and without. And so he received this name Santo Daime, which means in Portuguese, holy give me, and it's meaning, you know, give me light, give me love, give me strength, and a series of guidelines for the rituals. And she also began to give, we refer to him as Master Neo, and she began to give him these hymns, and inside the hymns that they contain the teachings of this doctrine, and the central activity of all of our rituals. Around the early 80s, the Daime left the forest because it was way deep in the forest. It took 3-4 days to get there. It left Brazil. It left the forest and went into all over Brazil and traveled through Europe, the United States, Canada, Japan, and all over the place. There's many churches in the United States. The mother church of the Daime is still in that region of the Amazonas. We call it Mapaiawa. So that's all I really have to say about the Daime. If you guys want to ask questions, I can answer any of your questions. So just wanted to give you an overview of what was Santo Daime. Now I'd like to just tell you a little bit about my story. So I've been doing personal growth work most of my adult life, and it just wasn't really going deep enough for me. I wanted something more, and I was always into meditation, and I was meditating one day, and I got this really strong message, and I've gotten strong messages before, and they're really strong and loud, so I got this message that said, you need to go find a channeling group. And this is like in 1999, and I went, I don't know, where do you find a channeling group? I didn't know what that meant. So I called a friend of mine, his name was Barry, and I figured he would know. Barry would know. He would tell me what. So I went to Barry and I said, "What do you think this message means? Why is it so strong?" And he said, "Well, I think I know what it is." And he told me all about the Santo Diame, and I got really interested. And what really caught my attention was that he described it as having like this really direct experience with the divine, and that really was something that really intrigued me. It's always intrigued me. I've always been so curious about the what it's like and what's like on the other side. And so I began to work with the medicine, and I have had my direct experiences, and I continue to channel that and to develop that channel. And I'm very sensitive, and I've had lots of really very profound experiences. My fear is my big thing. Fear, that's my big thing. So it's always showing me where my fear is and how to work with my fear. And, I've had astral doctors work on healing and pulling things out of me, out of fear, parts of my fear out of my body. I've shown, rewiring my brain and thinking things in a new way. Anyway, I've had lots of experiences, and I learned to detach from my fear. That's what I've learned to do, is detach from it. Because my fear never really goes away. It's always there. And so I'm learning to navigate, and little by little I'm learning to understand who I am and to peel the layers of the onion away and to meet myself and to meet my authentic self and to really try to figure out what my mission is and why am I here. And I feel like I'm getting there. I understand that this work that I'm doing, that I'm now doing, I feel like it is really important. It is my mission, and that feels really good to know that. I've noticed over the years that something was missing when I was going to these Daini works. That it just seemed like there needed to be somebody that really understood this medicine, and then also needed to know about psychology, because look at all the stuff that comes up, when you work with this medicine. So I decided that I wanted to know how to do that. I wanted to understand traditional psychology. So I'd already retired from a corporate job I had, and I went back to school. I got a master's degree and collected all my hours and became a therapist. And because I really want to understand, I wanted to understand the personality and how it's developed, and to understand, the scientific study of the human mind and our behaviors. I began to notice that people around me that were going to the works with me, they were like drinking gallons and gallons of Daime, it felt like to me, and they weren't really going anywhere. And so I was, it always intrigued me, well, how come some people really do really profound work, and other people just drink and nothing happens. So, one of my answers to that, one of my answers, I don't know if it's the right answer or not, but one of the answers is this concept of spiritual bypass, and that is, I'll read you, it's a tendency to use spiritual ideals, teachings, and practices to avoid human needs and feelings and personal issues. So it's actually like a pretty defense mechanism. It's when one is tuning out and not really tuning in, and you're bypassing this internal healing and focusing on spiritual woo-woo or whatever. At the MAPS conference that I went to, and she already explained what MAPS was in 2013. There was this man there. His name was Eduardo Gastamundi, and he talked about this concept, and he said that to be able to think new thoughts, one has to bear a certain amount of pain. If we want to continue evolving and growing, we have to be able to tolerate contradictions and incompleteness and uncertainties for some time until a new insight, a new synthesis of new ideas, a new form to form a theory or a gestalt, but an integrated structure is formed. So we need to be able to tolerate some discomfort. And maybe during the ayahuasca experience, it depends on the mental state of the person. Some people avoid being in this transformative process. Perhaps a new insight is going to destroy a defense mechanism that's really deeply rooted and that we're holding on to. That's hard. And, and some people may have they may be incapable of bearing the emergence of a repressed material that comes up and experiences by themselves. It's been stuffed down for so long. So ayahuasca helps, can help you develop your higher self, but only with further work. And, why are we suffering over and over again, and what is our part? And these are really difficult questions. And so this is where, for some, working with a therapist can assist you in integrating these powerful passages that you go through. So what is psychotherapy? I think that a lot of people think psychotherapy is for crazy people, and it's for, people that are, psychotic, or I don't know what people think, but I think they think it's for people that have really serious mental illness. And we treat with people like that, yeah. But the real power in psychotherapy really lies in helping people to heal their childhood wounds, because what is left unhealed, the effects just end up bleeding into your other relationships everywhere as an adult. So who in this room hasn't had some troubling experience when they were a child, neglect, abandonment, the sexual, physical, emotional abuse, or how about the devastation of living with alcoholism in your family, or feeling seen or unheard, or domestic violence, lots of things. And maybe some of you have already healed those things, and that's great. But for sometimes these early traumas and wounds that are revealed while drinking ayahuasca can be very troubling. And it could be very helpful to work with a therapist who really understands the medicine path, and also knows the right questions to ask, and where to guide you, where to dig deeper, and to where to look for the signs that are coming up in the visionary experience to help tie that into your psychology. So, and someone to contain the experience for you. Gabor Mate is a really good source on this topic. You can see his videos on YouTube. He talks a lot about ayahuasca and addictions, and he says that ayahuasca shows you, he says, the psychological baggage that you've carried with you all your life, and you see it as baggage and not part of yourself, and then when you see it as baggage, you can put it down. I thought that was really powerful, and so it's showing you what you deeply hurt about, and physically, mentally, and psychologically, and it shows you the pain that you're running from. So you go back to those difficult places of a child, but then you get to see them from the perspective of an adult, and that's where the transformation begins. So another area that I found useful to talk about is Stanislav Grof, who is one of the leaders of transpersonal psychology. He coined the term spiritual emergency. And this is when, working with, any kind of non-ordinary states of consciousness, in some cases, it doesn't happen all the time, but in some cases, these new realms of mystical and spiritual experiences enter into a person's lives suddenly and dramatically, and can result in fear and confusion. So this process of growth and change becomes kind of chaotic and overwhelming. So somebody working through a spiritual emergency may appear to have a mental disorder if it's viewed out of context, but actually they're undergoing a normal reaction. And he says it's important to note that that these crises can be seen as transformative breakthroughs, huge breakthroughs, and that they can hold tremendous potential for physical and emotional healing. So when understood and treated, he says, in a supportive manner, spiritual emergencies can become gateways to higher levels of functioning and new ways of being. So I believe that psychotherapy, has the potential to help individuals make meaning out of their experiences and integrate them into something that is relevant to learn from. A typical therapist, may view what is occurring in these cases as pathological and outside of normalcy. But in more training and sensitivity really is needed in my profession. Because having like a near-death experience or seeing, talking to your dead relatives or seeing spirits and whatever is normal ayahuasca experience. If I had a therapist in the early stages of when I was first drinking, that would have been so helpful for me to help me understand, because I had so much fear of the dying. Why was I so scared? What was that about? It would have been really helpful to really have a therapist help me go deeper with that, because it would have helped normalize some of the messages that I was getting, and so I could apply them to my life. And actually, within the last 3 or 4 years, I just started working with my therapist with doing this kind of work. And there's a group of us, therapists and psychiatrists and practitioners that are trying to get together now in Los Angeles and form a support group. We're working on that. It's just beginning stages. If any of you are therapists out there, let me know. Please come see me. MAPS also has a list of referrals that you can work with that understand this kind of work. So this is what I've learned. I'm going to give you some tips of things that I've learned about how to integrate your experiences. First thing is you need to journal right away. Right away. What happens? And spend time with it every day, because if you don't, you're going to lose it. For example, I just did a work last week, and I was driving home. It was late at night on the Pacific Coast Highway, and I said, and I came up with this, oh my God, something that I was going to say here that was going to really tie it together. It was so good. It was so perfect. And I said, I'll remember that. Don't worry, you'll remember it. Oh, I can't remember it. I didn't write it down. I didn't write it down when I got home. I lost it. Yeah, I could have done it on my phone in the car, but then I was driving by myself and it didn't work. But yeah, tape record it if you can, because you're going to lose it. So, that's the second thing. You got to keep it alive, because what happens is the brain is expanded and then it contracts. So I call it, we go flat, then we don't remember. So, do something with it so that you don't lose it. Anchor it somewhere. Create an altar, create a sacred object. I have lots of those all over my house. Do some meditation, get quiet and really listen. And make the changes that you're being guided to do. So that you're being guided, that you're getting message to make a change. So make the change. And, with courage and faith and trust. And I'll give you an example of something that I did. My first experience, first time I went to Brazil, I had my most profound experiences with the medicine, most profound. And they were serving the strongest Diame I've ever had. I've never had anything since then as strong. And they were serving it in these little bitty cups, the tiny little cups, like the cup you would get when you go to the hospital. They put the pill in the little cup, little teeny weeny cup. And I saved this cup for years. I had this cup on my altar, and because when I would look at it, it would remind me of those experiences, and it was really important. And then eventually the cup broke into little pieces, and I had to throw it away. But that was how I anchored it for myself. Ralph Metzner talks about this shift in consciousness, and he says that 99% of what we do is unconscious. 99% is unconscious. So it's hard to become conscious. And to develop consciousness, you have to counteract the habitual processes that make you go unconscious. So you have to work at it. And mindfulness is not automatic, you know, it really takes work. So the next thing is that what would be is make a decision that when you work with this medicine, you know, if you're doing the next time you work with this medicine, that you be clear. What is your intention? You know, make it real. Make it something really important. Really important. Something that you really want with all your heart and soul. Be specific. Just don't say, "Oh, I want to have a healing." You know, what kind of healing you want? Ralph Metzner says that your intention on your question determines what you will pay attention to, and that in turn determines what you become aware of. So, you know, pay attention to that. What your wish is, what you want to transform within yourself. The next thing is the fourth thing is to talk about your experiences with your people in your inner circle, people that are in your inner circle of your life. Who are the people that are in your inner circle? And people in your community, maybe the circles of the communities where you might do this, and the leaders, and talk to them about that. Because maintaining these connections between the ceremonies is going to require you to do something to invoke this experience back into your consciousness. So we say in the Daime, we call them work. We call the ceremony a work. So in the Daime, so we say the work is between the works. So you're doing the most of your work between the works, processing and processing what happened. So just don't make this an interesting thing that happened to you. So. And then the last thing is to seek counseling, get some support. You know, we can't always find meaning in the experience, and sometimes we need help, and it's complicated. A therapist can really help you interpret what is telling you about your life, and what are the patterns that you have to pay attention to, and what needs to transform. You know, it's kind of like dream work. You know, in that the meaning of the dream is not always obvious, because our unconscious is feeding the dream, and it doesn't have language. It only speaks in symbols. So the unconscious is also feeding the ayahuasca experience. So, you know, are you able to tolerate these contradictions that come up? You know, choosing to drink ayahuasca is making a decision to remember who you are, and it may be difficult. To deal with what happens, what comes up. So the willingness to look at your shadow material in a safe, supportive environment, that may be a good choice for some people. Okay, so I want to just do a little esoteric part here. So this, I don't know if I've used the word doctrine, but we use the word doctrine in our tradition, and it's not. And the doctrine is not a rigid set of rules. It's not what a doctrine is. It's rather, as Jonathan Goldman says, it's a living matrix of consciousness. A living matrix of consciousness. So it's more of like an organizing principle of humanity's awakening to the Christ consciousness. And what is that? That's love and the Sacred Heart, and planting the seeds of compassion in all of humanity. And so there's this legend that we have in the Daime that when Jesus died and when his teachings started to become distorted, right? It started immediately to become distorted, and we started entering into this really dark phase for humanity. And so this doctrine, this consciousness, left the world, and it entered into the deep forest, into the vine and the leaf, and it waited, with its guardians, the peoples of the Amazon, for the day when humanity would be able to embrace that. I want to read to you, this is a channeling by a woman named Isabel Barce, and she's from the Daime, a woman from the Daime, and she, hold on, let me take a second. And she channeled this really amazing thing, so Let me read it out on this pieces of it. So ever since the first sacred knowledge emerged on the planet and its avatars incarnated, humanity has matured in its evolutionary process. Each stage is confined to a zodiacal area that influences it positively or negatively. In each period of approximately 2,000 years, an avatar incarnates that will work with the degree of awareness that humanity and the planet have reached up to that point. So 600 years after the incarnation of Buddha, Jesus Christ incarnated, ending the era of Aries and ushering in the age of Pisces, a negative sign of the water element. And negative eras are unclear times when esoteric knowledge is persecuted. It is secretly transmitted from generation to generation to be preserved until the next positive era when it expands itself again and the initiation schools can come out of the shadows. So Aquarius is a positive era of the element era, and in this moment there are already incarnated souls on this planet qualified to lead human consciousness to new portals of knowledge, upgrading of the work. So the Aquarian age will positively expand our mental body, increasing intelligence and sensitivity and transforming human consciousness. So in the midst of this process, the perception and image of the divine will be collectively amplified so that it will merge the egregores of all religious beliefs. And in the right time, the divine I Am presence will redeem universal brotherhood, uniting Christians, Buddhists, Jews, Muslims, and all the traditions that are able to evolve with their sacred knowledge. And this will be done through the revelation of the esoteric fundaments of each line, which had to remain hidden during the Piscean age. In order to reopen schools of initiation, all the knowledge that is stored in the subtle worlds begins to pour upon earth and captured through channels that are properly prepared for this purpose. So, this is what I call the mystery school about this whole thing. Why did all of you arrive at this very small opening? You came here. It's like not everybody gets exposed to this. We're living in Los Angeles where there's 3 or 4 million people, and there's just like a handful of people that are really becoming exposed to this. I don't think it's a coincidence that you arrived here. In my opinion, I believe that this medicine is so sacred and so important right now. That if we want to save this planet from self-destructing, then people have to wake up. They have to wake up. And and that means that people need to be operating out of their highest self. And how can you be operating out of your highest self if you're still walking around, with these wounds, these childhood wounds that haven't been healed? So we need to heal what's broken and move into health and balance. And when we do that, everything will fall into its rightful place. And that's what I call integration. That's what integration means to me. How are we for time? I don't know. I'm losing track of time. Am I good? Can I go? I'm going to talk a little bit about the legalization of the daime. So in 1999, the leader of the Oregon Church in Ashland, Jonathan Goldman, he was arrested, and 200 liters of daime were confiscated from him. At the same time, this man named Jeffrey Brofman from the UDV, that's the União de Vegetal, that's the other Brazilian religion that uses ayahuasca. Many liters of his ayahuasca was confiscated. And then what he did, he was a very wealthy man, he decided to take his case to all the way to the Supreme Court. And in 2005, he won his case, unanimous 8-0 with the Supreme Court under the Religious Freedom of Restoration Act. There were still problems with the Department of the DEA of how to work out the logistics of how to control the ayahuasca. around the same time, 2005, the Oregon churches decided that they wanted to do the same thing. So they hired their lawyers, and they put together their case, and then they finally won their case in 2009. And that was only for the state of Oregon. So, and they worked out the details with the DEA and they assisted them, and they now assist them in bringing it through customs, and it's very friendly and respectful relationship. So my church, I'm in California, and I had always been, ever since I came in '99, right after Jonathan had gotten arrested, I'd always been watching the legal, paying attention to what was happening legally, and very closely paying attention, and it was always my dream that I could be able to do what I was doing in my freedom and not be, I wasn't doing anything wrong. I'm like doing the most important thing on the planet, and I wanted it to be legal. So I waited and waited and waited and waited and waited for the right time for the lawyers and the team to get together when we thought it would be the right time. And let's see, in December of 2013, I went online. They told me, I didn't think this up myself, they told me what to do. I went online and I filed for I went to the DEA website and I filed for a DEA registration number to import a controlled substance. And so they got my application and they didn't know what to do with me. And they scrambled and they put up a stink. They sort of said, well, now the state of California must approve this. And they went to the state of California, and the state of California said, okay. They didn't put up a fight. So then they kind of made up all these other excuses and asked me all these funny questions. And then finally in June of the following 6 months later, I was given a registration number. They came to the place where I store the sacrament to make sure, where I was storing it. They wanted to know. They were really only concerned with diversion. They want to make sure that it's being accountable, and that I'm tracking it, and that it's locked, and who has the key, and where's the key, and how many people can know where the key is, and that kind of stuff. So it's been very, very respectful relationship, and it's free. I'm free to do this. It feels really, really, really good. Really good. And I'm hoping that that there's going to be there is more movement now towards the other ayahuasca circles, because we know there's lots and lots of circles here in Los Angeles and all over that are working with this medicine on making it legal, because I think it has a good chance. So that's where I stand with that. So just to kind of wrap it up here, I want to say that most of the readings that you'll see out there on this topic of Santo Diame that are written in English are they're written by authors who have really limited first-hand experience. So be careful what you read if you want to do more research on what is Santo Diame. Be careful what you read. I only endorse one book right now that's written by what I consider a Santo Diame master. His name is Alex Polari, and he wrote a book called Forest of Vision. It's also called The Religion of Ayahuasca. It's a really amazing book. So lots has been written on the subject of Santo Diame, and a lot of us, when we read it, we sort of cringe because it's just never depicted in the right way. I just want to put that out there. I'm working on trying to compile some information to where to direct people on good places where it's accurate and authentic. And I'm happy to pass it along when I get that compiled. So I want to thank you all for listening to me. And if anybody feels called to work with me and in a therapeutic relationship, I offer you my heart and my years of working with this medicine and my professional experience. And you can contact me if you want. So thank you all for being here. Questions?
I've got a question.
Oh, question.
think that it was, the reason why they were able to put your case through was because you were actually part of the Santo Diame, which was already a church that they had heard of, as opposed to maybe more of a non-denominational circle?
No, they were only, I was only really granted this because I had an affiliation with Santo Diame, and Santo Diame had already been recognized in this court as a legitimate religion.
Okay.
With lineage, with a lineage from Brazil. It wasn't, it had merit, they had already proven themselves in Oregon. So I didn't do anything other than sort of tag along. Yeah.
I think you said your church was in California. Where specifically?
Say it again, the what?
You said your church is in California, yeah?
Here in
Oh, here in LA.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
So in terms of working with you, is there anything that you ask for in terms of the people do beforehand, prerequisites or internal work that?
No.
No?
No, not at all. The only thing is that I can't work with somebody that I know. It's a dual relationship, so there's a couple of people here I know. But I don't know you. I'd like to get to know you.
I like that.
Okay. Is there some sort of a screening process when you accept for the work? Do you require a few number of times to go through it, or can you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, for us, we do have a screening process. We like you to have a sponsor, somebody that knows you, so somebody that we know knows you, bring you in to kind of be with you. We have medical questions we ask. We need to know what kind of medication you're on, if you're taking any, because there are certain medications that do not work with the ayahuasca. I like to interview the people, myself, so I can see them and see how they're, responding. And it's just if you have an interest, this is something that you really feel called. This is not something that you do because you think it will be fun, because it's not fun.
Do you provide the therapeutic treatment afterwards as part of the service that you give?
No, so my service is not ever done in ceremony. That's outside of my scope of practice. I'm just offering, as a therapist, to help you integrate what happens, what occurs. So it'd be afterwards in therapy, traditional psychotherapy.
In your experience, how important is the diet leading up to and abstention generally leading up to consuming ayahuasca?
Be honest, Vicki.
Like I noticed that the Brazilians, they'll eat a big old fat meal right before they're gonna drink, or they'll have to take a break and they'll go have a meal. So I think it's different for everybody. I think with in the beginning, it's good if you could watch what you eat, so that because maybe you might have a little bit of anxiety about the whole experience, so you maybe want your experience to be good. It's always good to go into anything that you do clean. So, to eat, it's good to be clean. I do that. I try to eat good that day, the day before, not, avoiding, like junk and, chemicals. And they say not to eat fermented foods, but certain fermented foods don't work mixed with the MAO inhibitors. So it does certain fermented foods and aged cheeses and like that. But I'm not real strict, but I might have been strict in the beginning. I probably fasted for an all day or something. I don't do that anymore. I like to get some protein in the morning to get me through it, because our ceremonies are really long, and we sing and we dance, or we sing and all night long for hours and hours and hours and hours. And so I like to have something in my system to keep me stamina. So I don't like to fast.
Is there any in the church any type of a thing of doing a series of sessions versus just one? Because I know some of the services like down in Peru and Brazil where they do several sessions in a row, or this or whatever. But is there any type of advantage or disadvantage to doing a series versus just one ceremony and then maybe a month later doing another ceremony?
So in the Diame we have, ours is a little different than maybe other ayahuasca circles, because I know a lot of people will do 2 days in a row or 3 days in a row. We have a calendar, so we have very specific works. We works twice a month. We have just specific works, so it'll be, it's not 2 days in a row, but sometimes we have our elders come from Brazil, and we'll do a back-to-back work. And there is a benefit in that. There's always like the first work is really like where a lot of cleansing occurs in the first work, and then the second one is maybe a little bit less or more of a, for us it's more of a celebration, or it's lighter. And then we do have workshops and where you could really go deep and do them a bunch in a row, and that is really powerful. Yeah, very powerful to do them in a row. But typical Santo Diame works are not set up that way. They're twice a month. And then we have we have festival works in June and December where we do lots of works. And so it's more of a celebratory thing where we do more dancing.
How far is the cultural or geographical spread of the church of Santo Diabete? I know you mentioned that ayahuasca had traveled to Japan and stuff, but outside of Brazil and the U.S., are there places where the Church of Santo Diabete is prevalent?
Yeah, it's in Europe. It's in, I would say in the United States there's probably 40 churches or so in the United States, maybe more. I've lost track of that. But it's in Europe. Quite a lot of places in Europe. I think it's also in Israel, Australia. It's pretty spread out. I didn't bring the numbers of how many churches there are. I didn't bring that. It's pretty there.
You mentioned that you like to bring people in through a sponsor. How would you go about getting to find a sponsor?
I don't know. I don't know. It's kind of like I don't have a good answer for that, really. No. If you don't know anybody, just wait until the person comes. And if it's right for you, it'll happen. It will happen.
It's showing up in my dreams.
Showing up, yeah. Pursue it. What we like to do, I don't know if this is, what we like to do is, we don't believe in proselytizing, so we don't go telling people, oh, you should come to Santo Diame, because we think that this is really serious work, and a person needs to be able to arrive at the decision that they want to do this kind of work on their own. You tell them that they need to do this before they're ready, and it's not going to work. So it needs to be, somebody needs to want this all on their own. So we don't ever do that. And so what I've been doing over the years is is I tell people that sponsor people to wait till the person asks you 3 times. If they ask you 3 times, then they really want to do it. Okay? If they say it one time, they could mean, oh, that was cool, I want to try that. And then don't go sending them information about it. Wait till they ask you 2 more times.
Thank you very much, first of all. I was curious what your psychotherapy technique is, what schools of psychotherapy or styles of psychotherapy, and I'm going to try and sneak in a second question. If you've seen any adverse medical or psychological outcomes within the church that are well known or have occurred that people should know about, beyond sort of maybe an acute, distressing experience.
Wait, what was the first one?
The first one was the psychotherapy sort of school, transpersonal psychology.
I'm mostly psychodynamic.
Psychodynamic, okay.
I believe that's where, it needs to go. People come in and really want to do work, and let's go deep. Let's really go there. Yeah. But I could do CBT and other things, Okay, the other question was...
Have you had any bad Have you seen any bad outcomes in
Never, no.
when used in this
the only thing I've seen is
context?
I've seen people that I think are not really appropriate. I don't think it's working for them. I see them drinking, and I think that they have some issues, and I don't think it's for everybody. But it's really, we believe that this, we call it the center is free, so whoever arrives, comes, they want to be healed, so we work with it. But no, I've never seen anybody have any psychotic episode or anything. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, absolutely. Or
No,
serotonin
no.
syndrome or anything like that.
No, never seen that. I have a couple of people, one of the things that really interests me is people that really have depression and they really want to use the Diame to go off their medication. And so I've been doing more research on that and wanting to get more involved in that. I have one person that is doing that right now. So we're working on that. That's what I want to know more psychiatrists that know this medicine and to help with that.
In your Santo Diame ceremonies, you talk about the singing and the dancing. Does everybody have to participate in that? I find, well, with my group, we take the first drink and let that process, and then usually the second one we'll sing and dance later, but I can't imagine having to sing the whole time. I don't know if my brain can handle that.
No, it's totally nobody forces you to do anything.
Oh, okay.
The people that are there that we call them fardados, they're the ones that are, that are committed to this path and to learning the hymns and to holding the container for everyone else. So we're there to hold space for you, get people to come and do whatever you can do whatever you want. Well, you got to drink the first round because otherwise, why are you there? You don't come. Drink the first round, and we say dancing. There's not dancing. We don't. Most of the works are not dancing. I think people have a concept of the Diame is about all dancing all over the place, and of course the dancing is really very small movements back and forth. They're not. It's not intense or anything, and you can sit down whenever you need to and if you just want to sit and listen to music, you can sit and listen. But the people that are there to learn the hymns and to hold space for everybody, we do it. We sit there the whole time, and if we need to go do something and process something, then we'll step out and go do it, and kind of organic how it happens. That one person goes down, another one's there to fill in the hole.
Hi, Vicki.
Hi.
So I would like to address the gentleman a question about negative possible side effects and damages. So I will refer to a story about an ayahuasca ceremony, not a Santo Diame ceremony, in the jungle. So they brought for a group a wonderful shaman, but from very far and very old, and he arrived late and started the ceremony. After a good amount of hours, I went to sleep, but the medicine kicked in very hard for some people, and especially one man that came from Scandinavia, if I recall correctly. And he got possessed and in a very terrible state, psychotic break. And he called the friend that referred him and told him he didn't know what to do with himself, so was thinking of the worst. He would never go back inside. And you have to go back inside, so he will pull whatever entity and disruption is there. And don't do the worst, what you're talking about, like taking it to an extreme state. And so finally he went back, and the shaman that was more refreshed and alert this time, didn't want to sleep at the end of the ceremony, pulled whatever was there, and he came back to normal and kept his life. So that's more typical of extremely rare cases with ayahuasca, which is stronger oftentimes than the Diame. Not some Diames are very strong, as Vicki was saying. And this is not what happens in the Diame, because there is a very strong structure, very safe structure, and a lot of support for everyone to be taken care of with very strong ethics, which sometimes are lacking with ayahuasca, because people can get ayahuasca nowadays fairly easily. Spiritual tantra teacher and many others that believe they are highly qualified, and maybe they are for certain people, and sometimes there are misuses of the medicine, and damage and critical damage do occur. You have to be aware of that. That was a very good question. So I recommend very much to go to the Santo Diame if you want to have a safe, ethical, with high integrity structure, and to be supported if you need any type of support, because people like Vicki have been doing this for many years, and there is a very strong support system during, before and after, especially for integration. That's very important if you don't know where to go at least on the beginning of the path, if you want to know the medicine in a safe container, that you go to the church, regardless if you're a religious person or not. You will see a very high standard of work. And then when you think of where you want to go next, if you choose to do so or not, at least you have a great point of reference, and you know when you talk to the person, most likely that this person is with integrity and safe to work with. That's my recommendation in that regard. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Oh, not for me, but just one more question.
Thank you. A couple things. First of all, the last comment, which was really important. Ayahuasca, as you said, was a brew, right? With actually up to 75 different possible admixture plants traditionally. Santo Diame just uses, as you said, just the vine and the leaves. But many shamans combine other plants that are much more risky. Plants of the solanaceous genre, nightshade, Brugmansia, Toei, or Datura, that could really produce very adverse reactions for people, physically and psychologically. But just a quick question, it's unrelated to that, was based on what you just said and the findings of Jordi Riba around brain and the lower defense mechanisms that happens during the ayahuasca experience, I see the value of integration work with a therapist afterwards in between, but what about a kind of modified therapeutic work during the ayahuasca peak experience? Do you think that would be legal, ethical, safe for people? I know the shaman who I work with often does a lot of suggestion and other kinds of instruction for us during the peak, really helping us focus on gratitude and love, and those are really powerful in that moment. And I'm wondering your thoughts on that, doing a kind of ayahuasca therapy.
Well, for me, it would be outside my scope of practice, so I couldn't do that. I mean, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that because it's not ethical for me to do that. To do psychotherapy with, inside the ceremony. That's out of my scope of practice. But a lot of times, we do have workshops that are, we used to, we had one, I'm trying to word this correctly. We actually called it Daime therapy in the very beginning. And it was more of a ceremony. We're drinking the Santo Diame, and we're laying down. It's not the same structure as a typical Daime work. And then, but the integration and the talking about what's going on is usually afterwards, not like during the ceremony. So I've not seen that yet. Would that be useful? Yeah, but I wouldn't call it psychotherapy because then that would be. Then that would be unethical. But sounds like a good idea.
And there are traditions, not necessarily with ayahuasca, but with other entheogens that work in a explicitly psychotherapeutic, psychiatric framework. Samuel Widmer is one of them, and a tradition coming out of him, for example.
Yeah, I'm sure this is going to eventually be what's going to end up happening, but right now it's in the beginning stages, right? So that's right?
Great. Thank you, Vicki.